My name's Eric Conrad. If you haven't met me before, I know I've met many of you based on just kind of following Slack and whatnot. So if I met you before, nice to see you again. And if I haven't met you before, it's great to meet you. So I've spoken at most of the Blue Team Summits, I think. Last time was 2020, which I'm surprised it's been 3 years, but time flies when you're having a pandemic or something like that, right? So anyways, it's good to be back. Good to see everyone. And one of the things I like to do on my talks is make them very actionable. So if you go to the Summit Resources 1B, I linked to every resource I mentioned will be linked there. The EVTX files I'll be showing you and discussing are there. And there's also a follow-on talk. There's 2 follow-on talks that I plan off of what I'm going to talk about now. One is, well, what you're about to see. I don't want to spoil it too much. Leave only footprints when prevention fails. Like if someone manages to get by your defenses, can they do so silently? The answer is not really. There's always hints there, right? And then you may have, if you've seen my talks previously, you may have seen me talking about Deep Blue CLI. I gave a couple of DerbyCon talks on that, and it was time for a major update to Deep Blue CLI. So that's my next talk, which is in a couple of weeks. I linked to that on channel 1B. So first link is my website, ericconrad.com. Second link is the upcoming webcast on June 29th, I believe. Let me verify that, but I think that's right. Yeah, June 29th on the updated Deep Blue CLI. If you Google that, I've been updating it over the past week or so, most recently, but I plan to do more updates in preparation for that talk. And then later on, I'll give a third talk on how do you actually bypass things like Windows Defender antivirus? Like, how do you get past that? Is it possible? The answer is yes. Is it easy? The answer is no. But I wanted obviously a Blue Team focus talk for this summit. So I thought I'd focus on this now. All right. There we go. And actionable talk, links are on my website. We're going to focus on Sysmon. If you haven't heard about Sysmon, it's awesome sauce. It's amazing. They're turning into a full-blown EDRs. Sysmon can now block things, which is a pretty radical change, and you may have your EDR currently, and that's fine. You're, a Tanium or things like that. But one of the things I've learned over the years, and I've talked to some friends from Microsoft, is when there's a big incident at a company, Microsoft will often send, you're like a Fortune 500, Microsoft will send someone in to talk to you. And lessons learned. If you know the incident handling process, lessons learned, of course, right? The final step in incident handling is lessons learned. How do we improve next time? How do we make it better next time? How could we not catch the incident, but avoid the incident next time? Lessons learned. Never skip the lessons learned phase. Never, never, never. Okay, the biggest mistake incident handlers do is they don't have a lessons learned phase, right? And you want your executives in. If it's a serious incident, you want your executives in there, your leadership in there. If it's a big incident, maybe your senior leadership in there. Because one of the things as I've traveled this world over the decades of my career, focusing on information security, and that's literally true. And I talk to people like you around the world. And I've, been all over the world in this amazing journey I've been on with SANS and consulting and whatnot. The number one complaint I hear from people like you is management's not listening. We know what to do. We just need them to support us, And the thing about incident handling, if it's a serious incident, guess what? You have their attention. They're paying attention to you. So don't skip that step, right? And when Microsoft comes in, I have a good friend at Microsoft, a senior PM. He's like, Eric, every time it's the same slide deck. Turn on the stuff you already bought. Turn on the things you already paid for. Everyone wants to chase that shiny box, and the shiny box is now ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and that's going to absolve us of all our other sins. Yeah, our operations are sloppy. Yeah, we're not really doing Blue Team properly. Yeah, our SOC is mediocre. And I'm not putting, none of that is aimed at the people in the SOC. It's not their fault, by the way. I have a lot of thoughts on that. They've been often given an unfair fight, right? But my friend from Microsoft, Mark, is like, if they simply turned on the stuff they already paid for, it wouldn't have happened, right? So I'm not saying don't go out and buy Carbon Black or a Tanium or a Sentinel One. That's all great stuff. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, but before you buy that next thing, that next shiny box, right? We call it the shiny box syndrome. How about you just turn on the stuff you already bought? or turn on the stuff that comes for free with the stuff you bought, Sysmon. Sysmon's not installed by default. I wish it was, believe me, on Windows, but it's a free download from Microsoft that gives you EDR style capabilities. It keeps getting more and more amazing all the time. Like if you blink, you'll miss it. 3 months, 6 months is a long time for Sysmon. They update very aggressively, unlike the greater Microsoft. Sysinternals are a little fiefdom within Microsoft. They update very aggressively. If you haven't been paying attention for the past 6 months, you may have missed some pretty awesome stuff I'm about to talk about, right? So I have the EVTX files on my website or at conrad.com, and I have some sample commands, PowerShell commands for parsing them. Deep Blue CLI will also parse them, and I'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, right? All right, so I'm going to talk about C2 framework. Sorry about that. And I know this is an eye chart. We call it an eye chart when the font's so small you can't read it, but it's an eye chart by design. This is the rise of C2 frameworks, command and control, C2, of course, right? And it's an eye chart because there's so many of them. And this is a very partial list. So in the old days, we had Metasploit, right? And you've got like, a whole bunch of stuff. Sliver's a big one coming up now, and a bunch of other stuff. And Cobalt Strike, of course, is like the hotness right now, right? But if you look at all of them, you've got maybe 100, a lot, right? A lot. And by the way, if I can't watch comments right now. I'm seeing them scroll by. I'll circle around for questions later, just FYI, right? And these frameworks are massive in quantity, the amount of them, right? And what people end up doing is that, okay, let's find out how to detect Cobalt Strike. Let's find out how to detect Carbon Sliver, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of chasing individual frameworks, let's look at what they all seem to do. Because they all seem to do very similar things. And whether you're using Sliver or Metasploit or Cobalt Strike or whatever, they all act in very similar ways. So command and control is what happens after you get in, what happens after you break in, how people move laterally, how they escalate their privileges from a non-admin account. On Windows, we call those loser accounts. Yes, I know it's a bit of an insult, but if you're a non-admin user on Windows as a penetration tester, as I am, you're a loser account. I'm sorry. You realize I realize I spent most of my life using Windows as a user, as a loser, but that's no insult intended, but that's what we call them in the industry, loser accounts. You want to raise yourself to admin. You want to get local admin. You want to steal hashes. You want to steal tokens. You want to elevate to ideally domain admin, all that stuff, right? These frameworks help you get there. And I love this. They have a handy map graphic. Team Cymru, that's the Cymru is the Welsh word for Wales. I know that because I lived in Wales for a year in college. I know it doesn't look like Cymru when you see that in English, but Welsh is a strange language. W is a vowel in Welsh. Who knew? And if you are Welsh, I know I'm not pronouncing Cymru exactly right, but I haven't been there for a while, so spare me. I'm better than most Americans, I'd have to say. And every once a month they update this graph, and Cobalt Strike is the king. Cobalt Strike is the hotness. Pen testers use it, both authorized and not. Your networks are pen tested every day. You just don't get the report at the end of the day, right? And Cobalt Strike is interesting. They won't sell to blue teamers. Yeah, they won't. If you're a professional pen tester, as I am, and you go to Cobalt Strike and you ask to purchase Cobalt Strike, they'll say no. And I know this firsthand experience. They wouldn't sell it to me. I am a pen tester, but let's face it, I do mostly blue team. I'm more well known on the blue team side. I'm here now, Blue Team Summit. So it's not hard to figure out who I am if you're in information security, especially if you're doing blue team stuff. I'm not hard to find. And when I'd heard the rumor that they won't sell to blue teamers, and I have an inference on why. And here's the inference on why. They don't want us detecting it. They don't want us to be better at detecting it. Well, that sounds like a you problem, Cobalt Strike. That's a you problem. It's not a me problem. And by the way, I have friends with Cobalt Strike, so it doesn't really matter. This being recorded, don't repeat that. And Viper just jumped up. What's interesting, if you look at them on Twitter and follow this graph over the chart over the past year or so, Metasploit's always like number 2 or 3 every time. And I find that interesting. Because if you talk to the cool kids on Twitter, the cool InfoSec kids, they're like, oh, Metasploit, how very year 2000, Conrad. Oh boy, look at you using this dated tool. I'm like, it's always detected by my EDR. I'm like, yeah, if you use default values, sure. If you use the defaults, every EDR will shoot that thing down dead. Yeah, agreed. In other words, don't use the defaults. It's like default values in any tool. I just ran through a bunch of them before this talk. I can't talk about all of them, but most of them on this slide, yes, including Cobalt Strike. Yes, I have access. If you use defaults, the EDRs, even Windows Defender antivirus, which is totally awesome, by the way. You may have some antivirus, some EDR you have at work, but for personal use at home, stop paying for antivirus. Windows Defender antivirus is legitimately awesome. It is really hard to get past. And if you get past it, it's gonna light up like a Christmas tree in your logs. I don't know any way to get past it without lighting everything up. Believe me, I spent a lot of time on this. You can get past it. You can get past all of them, right? But don't use defaults if you're a pen tester. And so Metasploit, I was surprised. I would have thought Metasploit would have been lower down, because maybe the cool kids on Twitter, InfoSec Twitter, aren't the actual, they're a very small subset, a very vocal and popular subset, but they're a small subset. And it turns out controversy sells. The more controversial you are, the more followers you get. And that feedback loop is destroying the world, by the way. I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. I have thoughts on that. But the cool kids on InfoSec Twitter are like, oh, Metasploit is very 2010, 2000. I'm like, maybe it's because I'm very handy with it. I can get past virtually any EDR with Metasploit, because beyond all the amazing controls you have, I have source code too. And source code access gets me past just about anything. Because once I have the source code, the vendor is like a quick Metasploit trick. You have to have a template file. And any person who's been using Metasploit since way back, as I have, an exe to base your final exe on, presuming you're creating an exe, right? And there's a template file used by Metasploit, and the EDR vendors detect that template famously. They've been doing this for 15 years. So in other words, use a different template. You can use any exe you want. And if you simply change that template, half the EDRs lose it, right? And then they'll detect, that also throws off the imp hash. Now hold that thought on the imp hash, the import hash. Import hash is amazing. And Sysmon gives you that too. So they'll detect the template, they'll detect the imp hash of the template, and hold that thought on the imp hash, import hash. And they traditional antivirus, even the current EDRs, they often fall back on simple, dumb tricks that once you see them are easy to dodge. Now, I famously made Mimikatz, right? You've heard of Mimikatz. This is years ago. I created Mimi Dogs. Now, many people have created Mimi Dogs, MIMIDOGZ. It's an obvious thing. I heard that nation states were altering the Mimikatz. Mimikatz will dump the hashes and dump the tokens and plain text passwords on Windows 8 and older if it hasn't been hardened, et cetera. And I heard that, nation states were evading EDR by altering Mimikatz. And I'm like, okay, how hard is that? So I changed Mimi. I literally changed cat to dog. I did a streaming edit set across the source code, recompiled. And it went from like 80% detection on virus total to 5% just by changing cat to dog, right? And many people have done Mimi Dogs. I believe I was the first. That's not a terribly original idea. Let's be honest. But changing cat to dog went from 80% to 5% detection. And it's been like that forever. So all these vendors take shortcuts. And what's the easiest way to detect Mimikatz? Well, it turns out someone decided the string Mimikatz was a good way because it's all over the source code, right? Don't use defaults. And this happens a lot. So Sliver was the hotness. If you've been following, C2 frameworks, they rise and they fall, they rise and they fall. And Cobalt Strike is normally in the top spot lately. And then Sliver bumped up from being not even on that graph to number 2. And guess what? All the EDR vendors started detecting Sliver. And then it fell down. And then, another one pops up and then it falls down. Another one pops up and it falls down. It's like a balloon rising and falling, right? And a hot air balloon. And so what happens is, I'm like, hey, pen test buddies, this Sliver's the hotness. Use that. It's great. Doesn't get detected by anyone. And enough people start using Sliver that someone at Microsoft's, Windows Defender antivirus was like creating signatures for Sliver, whatever Sliver And often it's literally like strings. It's not always that simple, but they do simple things. Once you see it, right? And now it's Viper, now it's this, now it's that, right? And so I realized, like, instead of chasing, because there's over 100 of them, you don't want necessarily Viper rules and Cobalt Strike rules and Metasploit rules, in your sim, I mean. You want, like, let's detect what they do. Like, what do they actually do? What are the techniques they use? And let's figure out the techniques, not the tool per se, because that tool is going to be different next month. It's going to change again and again and again. You can spend your whole career whacking moles, Don't whack moles, which is like Sliver versus Viper versus whatever. Let's figure out because what do you want to do as a pen tester? I want to get in, I want to get some access. And if it's not admin access, if it's loser access on Windows, I want to raise my privileges to system locally. And then I want to become, that's local. By a system, I'm now God on that one system. That one system may be some dumb desktop that I don't actually care about. That's not the crown jewels, probably. Now, if it's the CEO's desktop, sure. It's some random, food service workers desktop or secretary, probably not so much. Then I want to raise privileges to system, and then I want to get at domain access. I want to move laterally, right? And if you look at all that, they all do very, very similar things. Sometimes the exact same things. Like get system on Sliver versus get system on Metasploit, same event logs, same logs. So let's step back from that whole chart, eye chart I showed you. Listen, what do these things all commonly do? If we drew like, a Venn diagram of what they do, let's focus on the overlap, right? That way we're not chasing Sliver or Viper or whatever. We're chasing the fundamental techniques, and that's what this talk is about. And can someone get through despite all your awesome prevention? If you're tuned into security, you've heard about the Blue Team Summit, you're actually dedicating 2 days of your life to this awesome stuff that I love, I live and breathe, and I sense you love that too. I suspect your organization's controls, your prevention is very good. If you're simply here, certainly it's better than average. You're the company you work with, right? The organization. Is a perfect? No, nobody's is. Nobody's is. Nobody's prevention is perfect, right? SolarWinds went undetected by how many Fortune 500s for how long, right? How long was that? Like, it turns out over a year, like 100-something Fortune 500s had SolarWinds compromised, and they didn't know it. So all of our prevention fails. Let's be honest. Everyone in this room, every company, every organization on the planet, our prevention fails, right? So if we know that, what then? What happens when you fail? What happens when prevention fails? And the answer is, of course, detect. Detection isn't sexy, believe me. It's a grind. SOCs are expensive. SIMs are expensive. They're expensive in OpEx, time. And our senior leadership hates OpEx, operational dollars, right? You have capital dollars, operational dollars, CapEx and OpEx. CapEx is very controllable. I'll buy this shiny box for $100,000, right? But OpEx, and then I'm pretty much done. Yeah, there's a maintenance, there's support for like 5% a year or something. And this takes some staff to run it, but my firewall's firewalling right now. I'm not even thinking about it. That's a heavy CapEx control, firewalls. OpEx is time. And I've been around decades now. I'm not exaggerating. First generation rootkit hit my company in 1993. Yeah, 30 years ago. 30 years in InfoSec, which is astonishing for me to say that. I don't feel that old, but the universe clearly disagrees, right? And it's been a wild ride. It's been amazing, right? And I've seen a series of executive leadership try to automate detection and put it in a box. And now I'm sure ChatGPT or something like that. Well, I'm not buying it. I'm still not buying it, right? It takes blood, sweat, and tears and time, right? And first of all, you need the logs. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. William Brandeis said that at Brandeis University fame in the US. He wasn't talking about InfoSec because InfoSec didn't exist then. He was talking about government transparency, but sunlight is the best disinfectant. Malware festers in the darkness. Let's add some sunlight. And I was talking to some fellow SANS instructors, and Jean-Francois, I asked, hey, is it actually possible? I know some smart people. I'm very blessed to know smart people, at SANS. And I asked a bunch of SANS instructors on our Slack, I'm like, can you actually get past without triggering any logs? Is it actually possible? And Jean-Francois and his friend Randy gave a talk on this, and it's 4D chess. They bend time and space. So if you want to see like the hard level, like the turbo level of when everything goes wrong, when it's the defender's worst possible day, you want to have your brain hurt as a blue teamer, watch that talk. I'm like, you can do what? But that's like, they gave themselves this mind challenge of what is the perfect case for an attacker and the worst case for a defender. And then as a defender, what do you do then? If you want to see 4D chess, I was blown away. Check it out. So let's look at what they all commonly do, right? They'll raise their privileges. They'll do DL injection, steal tokens, impersonate tokens. What's a token? A token is a security access token. It's a thing that gives you your domain privileges for a local process. So presuming you are a domain user on Windows, of course, and you log in, every process you launch has this little attribute attached to it called a token, and it gives your domain privileges to that token. The thing about tokens that's interesting, and it's still true today, I've tested this in the past few weeks, tokens linger. Like a domain admin can log in through RDP, which is very dangerous from a token perspective, by the way. They can log in via RDP, patch your box, and then log out. You're thinking, okay, that's a good news scenario. The box is fully patched, but they left the token behind. Those tokens linger for a long time. They linger in many cases, at least for RDP, until reboot. And the problem with the token is they can be stolen. Because remember, if I want to get system, there it is on the left there. System is the most powerful account on a Windows system, right? It's more powerful than local admin. All your system processes run as well system, hence the name, right? But if I break into a random desktop that's for a not important, a person that's not my target, their data's not my target, that person's not my target, but I'm behind that firewall, right? At least one firewall. System means I'm got on that system, which is, believe me, as a pen tester, we do the happy dance, right? I do. I still get the endorphin rush, the adrenaline rush when the first person clicks. That's the first adrenaline rush. And I have some agent running on their system. Yes, I do the happy dance. And then I labor to become system. That's a second happy dance. But now, the thing about pen testing is that burst of adrenaline wears off real fast when the next challenge sets in. CTFs are the same thing, by the way. You score those points, you're like, yes. And you realize there's a lot more points to score. Like, and so the adrenaline rush wears off quickly. So now I'm system, happy dance. Okay, now what? Well, I don't actually care about that box. I care about what that box can get me. So how can I leverage? How can I pivot? How can I move laterally, right? And the best way to do it is to, as the old saying goes, when you call hacking, I call logging in, right? Pen testers don't shoot off thousands of exploits. Ideally, the best pen test is one exploit only. Then what you call hacking, I call logging in, right? It's true. That's a dirty secret of pen testing. We just steal credentials. It's hardly worth calling it hacking at that point. I'm just logging in, right? And so I want to log in. The best way to log in, well, of course, a password would be great. In Windows 8 and older, that was easier, way easier. But Microsoft's gotten smart about that, right? Windows 10, Windows 11, they're legitimately secure. But so how do I, if I don't have your password, or I don't have your hash, or I can't crack your hash, what do I do? Well, steal your token. So I want to steal a token. Process migration is often overlooked as a critical element of pen testing. Let's say I upload some agent and I'm running. I have a very fragile foothold. Let's say I polymorphically encode some exe and get it past your EDR. And I'm attached to something like hello.exe. You always call it something innocuous, hello.exe. And often with these frameworks, if you can polymorphically encode an exe and run it, it'll still work. The hotness years ago, as I'll talk about, was PowerShell. PSExec, sorry. PSExec, well, PowerShell too. PSExec for moving laterally. PSExec was the hotness. All the frameworks use PSExec, another fine tool by sysinternals. And then the EDR vendors got really good at stomping that. They got really good at stomping PSExec style lateral movement, right? Very good. It turns out sometimes you return to the old ways. You might think an EXE is pretty weird dated way to do it. But if you polymorphically encode it, you can get in. I've done it. I've done it recently against a bunch of frameworks, right? A bunch of EDRs. But now you're running in this very vulnerable spot. And what you realize with the EDR vendors, especially Microsoft, is they update constantly. Like, I can't tell you the back and forth. A lot of this is built on Security 511, right? Security 511, I'm co-author of along with Seth Meisner. The scenario I'm about to show you is based on Security 511, right? And in Security 511, I spent a lot more time going through what actually happened, bypassing EDR. And when I built that whole bypassing Microsoft Defender antivirus, when I built that whole thing out, I had the whole thing working, like I built the slides. The whole thing was working beginning to end. And I had a series of these fragmented snapshots because I'm like, okay, do this snapshot and my VM, right? I'm creating logs. And I realized I had like 17 snapshots, and I wanted like one snapshot with all the logs continuously, right? One snapshot, all the logs. So I ran through the exact same scenario again. And by the way, I turned off, like these EDR vendors have like an upload to the cloud option, like upload this malware to Microsoft and let us analyze it for you. And I turned that off because I don't want them seeing what I'm doing. I don't want them knowing my polymorphic encoding and the way I got past and dodged the bullets. That was turned off. So I built the whole thing out with 17 snapshots. I wanted one more clean, just one snapshot beginning to end. I ran through the whole thing. Windows Defender stopped it, having never seen it, right? Interesting. So they're very good at detecting this stuff, right? Give them credit where it's due. But then I had to dodge this, as a saying from the Matrix goes, right? Trinity said, dodge this, I dodged that, right? Check out the EVTX files, Slavery and Metasploit, they're in there. And a quick, I won't bore you too much on, waste too much of your time, I should say, on Sysmon. You've probably heard of Sysmon. It's awesome sauce. You should have it. In a Windows environment, turn it on. And don't be like the cool InfoSec kid saying, oh, well, I have this, I have that, I have Carbon Black, that's all good. I'm not knocking any of that, by the way. I'm not. Awesome stuff. But people often overlook that. They kind of condescendingly look down on some of the free tools as being somehow not professional or not cool enough. And if it's not built in, but if it's free from Microsoft and it plays well with your SIM, and it costs you virtually nothing other than some time to get it tuned up, why not turn it on? A common question I get, it's a fair question. Well, if I have Carbon Black or Tanium or Sentinel-1 or one of these products, do I actually need this? I'm like, I don't care how you get there. I want you to have visibility. Remember, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? If you have the same visibility with some other tool, great. But do you really, be honest with yourself. Do you really have the same visibility? If you do, no worries. And just like, I'm not going to focus on Sliver versus Microsoft versus whatever. I don't particularly care how you're getting the visibility. If you already have the visibility, fine. Just make sure it's seeing the things I'm going to talk about next, right? And Sysmon, for me, is a low-hanging fruit to get that visibility, right? Just there. And amazing visibility. It gives you stuff that no other form of default Windows logging gets you, right? Process creation, network events, DNS query is often overlooked, but totally amazing. You know which process made that DNS request. That is gold. Like, more advanced SOCs log DNS. You should. Many SOCs log DNS for correlation, tying this event to that event. Sure, the firewall did this, DNS says that. That's all fine. I like DNS as threat hunting source. Like, just give me all your DNS requests. I can do threat hunting based purely on DNS, right? So DNS is amazing. Your SOC should have access to DNS events. But if I log on my bind server, or I log through Zeek, or I log through the Windows DNS server, I know the IP that made the request. Sysmon gives you the IP, the host name, and the process that made the request. That is gold, solid gold, often overlooked. Registry changes, malware not always, very, very commonly changes the registry. It's super common to change the registry. File creation events, WMI is the hotness now. So PSExec was the hotness for moving laterally. WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation Console or Command Line, WMIC, you may have heard of, right? The thing about PSExec to use laterally, it's loud. If I PS exec to a system that's never received PS exec before, you create a service. That's a allowed event. Service creation events are allowed. So that's like a heavier footprint. PS exec is from Microsoft, but it's not built in, right? It's not built in by default. You have to install it. So PS exec is allowed. It requires extra software. WMI is built in, silent, and the logging was terrible. The logging was, with native logging on Windows, WMI has no logging essentially, no logging of use to a SOC. The only way to log WMI without Sysmon is like this debug level logging. There's not even EBTX form. It'd be brutal to import that in with SIM. Like pulling that into Splunk, the default non-Sysmon logging is awful, right? You'd have to write like PowerShell scripts to pre-parse it and turn it into something. It'd be a heavy lift. Or use Sysmon. What's nice about Sysmon is when Mark Vasinovich sees like things happening in the Ukraine, malware being dropped in the Ukraine using new techniques, he updates Sysmon within sometimes weeks, right? Sometimes weeks. And malware started using WMI very heavily in certain nation states, including the nation state involved in Ukraine. You know what I'm talking about. Started using WMI heavily a few years ago. And he updated, and he realized there was no logging, no usable logging. He knows, like I know, like you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. He had a WMI logging, right? We'll talk more about WMI. File deletion is fantastic. Even this just for your layer 8 events. We know layer 8, right? Layer 8 is the mistake. The OSI model has 7 layers. I've been petitioning them to add layer 8. I'm not really, but layer 8 is the mistake. You know, they call it a picnic problem in share, not a computer, right? The user makes a mistake. They fat finger something. They delete something. So file deletion will log when a file is deleted and optionally archive a copy on top. That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. And I've had all my clients deploy these things. And hilariously, when they got hit with, one of them got hit with ransomware, and the ransomware was deleting all the files, they were auto-archived every one. It's like, we just had like a Z drive, like some 8 terabyte Z drive. Drives are cheap, right? And we just said Z colon, Sysmon, we mapped it to. And ransomware here to compute. And I told them, I said, watch that Z drive. So a shared drive, any file gets deleted, go. And there's some privacy issues there, obviously. So make sure that's in an area where there's sensitivity to the privacy involved. And in Europe, talk to your lawyers. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything. I'm no GDPR expert. So tread carefully from a privacy standpoint, but from an operational standpoint, setting those concerns aside, solid gold. So not only did they have all their computers logging into Z colon / Sysmon, it was Z colon host name Sysmon, I think. I said, write a script. I wrote them the script. If there's a huge explosion of files appearing there, set off an alert. And suddenly like 10,000 files appeared in like 3 minutes flat. And sure, ransomware was doing its thing. The whole thing was backed up automatically, and it was all detected automatically. Pretty cool. None of that cost any, my consulting fee cost some money, but that was all built-in stuff and a little scripting. Clipboard change. I found this interesting. I would never turn this on. I don't know why they added it. Must see some ransomware that does this, but it logs everything that is copied into the clipboard, including my password manager's passwords. It's like, that's a bizarre thing to add. I wouldn't add that. Process tampering is amazing. I won't get too far into it. I don't have time, but normally you map a file and then antivirus, when you're going to load an exe, it's mapped on the drive, right? And when you map it, your EDR jumps in and scans that thing. But what if I map it, EDR comes in, EDR leaves, and then I remap it and I go, right? Turns out you'll bypass all kinds of stuff that way. It's called hollow herpaderp. I could talk for an hour on that. I won't, but catches that too. Cutting edge stuff. And file block executable and file block shredding. This is based on actions in Russia, Russian malware in Ukraine. This is in November. They realized they were shredding, because any forensic person knows you delete a file, you can undelete it. You shred a file. So delete just removes the file, the entry in the file allocation table. Shredding overwrites, then deletes. If you simply delete, the file's still there in unallocated space, as I'm sure most of you know. But if you shred, overwrite, then delete, it's actually gone forensically. It's gone. And nation states started doing that, and you can now block these actions. So Sysmon can now block, and that's a watershed moment. And this, I'm sure there's more to come. And if you know the history of Microsoft, if you fall back way back, like way back in the Stone Age, Microsoft had no network stack built in. You had to pay separate for that, right? You know, I would fly my pterodactyl to work, and then we install NetWare, and then it literally couldn't do TCP/IP on its own, and now of course it can. And it didn't have antivirus on its own, and now it does. It didn't have a firewall. You had to pay for antivirus. You had to pay for firewall separately. You had to pay for good memory management going way back. It's all built in now. That's the trend. And so Microsoft starts shoving out these third-party companies by making these controls built in. Guess what? EDR vendors, buckle up. Buckle up. You're going for a ride, right? And one of my favorite things, it's hard to pick one. It's like picking your favorite child. But one of my favorite features of Sysmon is IMPASH, because it's trivial to change the SHA-256 hash of a file. You can literally add one bit. If I change Mimi cats to Mimi dogs, obviously the SHA-256 hash is going to change. So detecting the SHA-256 hash, or whatever hash you want to detect, that's trivial. I can literally add one bit. That's nothing, right? So it turns out Mandiant came up with this amazing idea. And sometimes the most powerful ideas are simple. What if we don't hash the bits, hash the DLLs, the names of them, and the order they're loaded? And that simple idea is super powerful. Now, there's a thing called the perfect solution fallacy. When I describe something like this, somebody who's committing the perfect solution fallacy raises their hand. I'm talking at a talk or something. You'd be too polite to do this, but sometimes people do. Oh, Eric, certainly the nation state would change the list of DLLs. They would alter the order or add an extra one and change the import hash, and therefore this is pointless. And that's called the perfect solution fallacy. And some people spend their entire career committing the perfect solution fallacy. When you see someone committing the perfect solution fallacy, maybe you're not as blunt as I am, I call them out. I tell them that's a perfect solution fallacy. Because yes, of course you could bypass this, but you could bypass your firewall, you can bypass the antivirus, you can bypass patching, right? And if you truly believe that a solution is not useful unless it's perfect in all use cases, which is what they're stating by saying they'll change the DLL, so why bother? Well, why bother with the firewall? Why bother with the antivirus? Why bother with patching? They all fail too, right? So if you truly believe the perfect solution fallacy, you wouldn't do anything because everything fails. But yet you still have your firewall, you still have your antivirus, et cetera. So what's the perfect solution fallacy really used for? It's designed to stop change. Stop necessary change. There's something in the human condition that resists change. And people sit on change management boards, stopping change, delaying change. These people are actually corrosive to your environment. They're toxic. They may be good people, they may be well-intended. So when you start suggesting Sysmon, if someone rises up and says, hey, well, they can get past that. Maybe you're not as blunt as I am. I would call them on the perfect solution fallacy. Say, listen, we have a firewall. That fails. We have antivirus. Get the idea. And let's look at some modern attack tools. IM Packet uses WMI. The nation states have moved on to that. Very silent unless you have proper logging. A quick analysis of password spraying. And this is a much shortened version of what we give you in Security 511, the new giant module we have in 511, which I'm pretty excited about. Brand new, by the way. I'm going to omit EDR because if I include EDR and everything else, this talk will be 8 hours. And I would actually happily talk for 8 hours, but we have other speakers who are just as awesome. So you get me going on this stuff, I'll go on for days. You can probably get that sense, right? So I won't, there's another talk. So right now, this talk is on what you're seeing now. The next talk is on Deep Blue CLI, detecting the stuff automatically through PowerShell framework. And the third talk is how I got past everything, more red team focus. That's coming up, right? But yes, you can get past it, but I lit the logs up like a Christmas tree, And 511 covers all that. WMI is quiet. It works by default. It's built in. PSExec is not built in. Again, the EDR frameworks are using PSExec previously, and that was going gangbusters 5 years ago. That was the hotness. And the EDR vendors caught on, and I tried hard to get past Microsoft Windows Defender antivirus. Windows Defender is a whole ecosystem of products now, including, well, antivirus. And I like to pick on Windows Defender antivirus, one, because it's so good, and two, because you have it. You have easy access to it. defending Carbon Black versus Tanium versus Sentinel-1. Now I'm speaking to a smaller subset of this audience. We all have Windows Defender, or certainly you could on some test laptop for free. So I like that as a good test case. It's a fantastic EDR, and everyone has access to it. Let's focus on that, right? And it's just as good as the others, by the way. It's very good. As far as antivirus goes anyways, top notch. I could not get malicious PSExec past Windows Defender. I tried. So I went to WMI, and it worked beautifully. Windows Management Instrumentation. So I did password spray. Of course, password spraying is password guessing is one account, 1,000 passwords, and your account lockup manages that pretty well. Password spraying is 1 password, 1,000 accounts. And if you time that right, it'll work. And if you time it right, account lockout doesn't matter. Not traditional account lockout, right? So I did the traditional thing. When you do a pen test, you create a word list. You always want to do spring, summer, fall, winter, or autumn. Spring, summer, fall / autumn, winter, year, exclamation point, right? Because if your company's password policy is not change every 90 days, uppercase, lowercase number symbol, winter 2023 with a capital W and a bang on the end works. You also try sports teams, always. In Boston, you would try Red Sox and Patriots and Celtics and Bruins, right? You tune your word list in. If you do that, those ones you're looking at right here, if I have enough users, almost always work. Almost always, unless they're doing something smart, like have I been pwned and checking their hashes, that almost always works, right? That's a complex password, haha, right? Users take those shortcuts, they do. And I use this neat tool called Hydra, and I get in. Yay, happy dance, right? I get in. Happy dance, winter with a 2023 bang, right? Now I'm in. Just quick aside, I'm going to focus on Sysmon, but 0 logs. If someone fails to log in 10,000 odd times, 11,380 times. If something fails to log in 11,380 times, your SOC should know. And by default, they won't. And I'll hear, oh, Eric, people fail to log in every day. Yeah, but not 11,380 times. No. If something fails to log in 11,380 times, someone's trying to hack you or something's broken, right? Something's broken. And I call this the broken windows theory of network engineering. The broken windows theory of network engineering. If let's say it's not malicious. Some script, some automated something is just banging 24/7. You wouldn't actually know on a login until you turn that on. If you turn that in, you're blown away with hundreds of thousands of logs. If the moment you turn it on, you see that, it's probably not malicious. It's probably just a mistake, layer 8. But good security helps operations. I call it the broken windows theory of network engineering. Good security goes hand in hand with operations. When you fix the small stuff, the easier stuff gets better. And when you start sniffing packets and looking at stuff like this, you'll fix all kinds of operational issues that people might have been unaware of, because the system's working, but not very well, or it's not working at all, right? So by default, you don't know it. Turn that on. That's built in. No Sysmon needed for that. The link's on my website, ericconrad.com. And we had credentials now. We shot straight in with WMI exec, shot straight in, no problem. This is with Windows Defender antivirus running, by the way. Bang. So with an EDR running, straight in. And logging was by default non-existent, right? And now I have this shell and I'm running commands. So now it turns out I am an admin locally. It turns out FGATA, Battlestar Galactica theme in 5.11, by the way. Gata managed the LAN when they were hacked by the Silence. I'm a nerd. Your key powers of inference probably told you I'm a nerd. Right. Guilty as charged. Nerd is a compliment. Geek is a compliment in my world, by the way. Call me a nerd and a geek all you want. I'm a local admin. Great. So that's easy enough, but I want more, right? I want more. And here is event 1. This is command line auditing. Command line auditing is the #1. And if you look down there, you'll see the IMPASH. When it says hashes, etc., you'll see an IMPASH, right? IMPASH is the awesome sauce, right? So Sysmon gives you can get the hash of every running process in your entire Windows environment. The IMPASH of every running process and every DLL, if you choose to, in your entire Windows environment using a free tool. That's amazing. That gives you massive visibility. It turns your entire Windows network into a massively distributed application-aware IDS. It does. And the IMPASH, as you'll see, is amazing. And notice that command line, CMD/Q, and it's mapping to the admin $ share. What it's doing is it's running a command and then sending the data to an admin share. Now, admin shares are used day to day all the time, but CMD redirecting output to the admin share hundreds or thousands of times tied to one process, that's not normal. That's not normal. It's very silent unless you turn on command line auditing. Now, there's a Windows Event 4688 that's built in the security log that gets that. That's not, command line auditing is not turned on by default on Windows, but Windows 7 and higher, you can turn it on or get Sysmon. And the benefit of Sysmon is you get the hashes. The hashes are amazing. You also see what process launched what. And here you'll see CMD was launched by WMI. See that right here? At the bottom, parent image, parent command line, parent user. WMI launched CMD rather. Telltale sign. This will catch whole swaths of C2 frameworks, whole swaths of them. And IAM packet and WMI exec are used by nation states, pen testers, both authorized and not. And just I want to focus on that command line. So command line auditing gets you that visibility. If I had one event, if you put a gun to my head in a SOC and said, you get one event, what do you get? I said, okay, Sysmon event 1. If I only get one, of course you get more than one. I want Sysmon event 1 because it gets me what launched what, every command running and the hashes. That's crazy visibility. Now, here's, again, people might stop this change. You suggest turning on command line auditing, and this comes up all the time with my clients, with my students. Well, we tried that and they said no. Why? We could leak passwords that way. We could leak keys that way. It turns out your developers or admins routinely type passwords or keys or send them via scripts on the command line. Okay. One, that's very dangerous to do. If you're literally like, I want to add a user. If I add a user by adding the username and the password as command line flag, I'm not talking passwords that are typed in a password prompt. I'm talking passwords that are flags. One, that's dangerous. If I type PS at that moment or task list, I'll see it. It's there in memory. The history command will show it to me on Bash and PowerShell. So if you're typing passwords on the command line and left in your history file, whether PowerShell or Bash, that's a risk. Have you ever considered that risk? And the last line I just came up with when I thought about this talk is, the road to information security hell is paved with good intentions. That's dangerous to turn on. We could log passwords, so we won't. And therefore, you missed what I just showed you on the last slide. Well, that's a pretty high price to pay. And why exactly are you sharing passwords on the command line? Because there's other ways to do it. So this comes up all the time. API keys, passwords. If you say no to command line auditing, it's the best event. I want a really good rationale. And I created a polymorphic payload. This one bypassed, and I didn't use defaults. And I actually omitted some stuff. I used a different template file, right? Bypassed Windows Defender. Windows Defender later caught it, having never seen it. Changed a few things. I added, see that -I16? I made a dash iterations. I made it 20 and got past it again. I changed 16 to 20 and slid right past again. And when they catch 20, I'll do 24 or 21 or whatever, right? Maybe I'll go back to 1 just to mix things up, right? And file block. Now, notice this. Here's a SHA-1 hash. I created this thing polymorphically. Polymorphic means many shapes. It's going to change every time. So the SHA-1 hash is going to change every time. The imp hash is the same every time, right? So I Googled the imp hash, and Google is the world's best password cracker. It is. 0 hits on the SHA-1 hash, but the imp hash gets 46 hits. Yeah, 46 hits. And this is true for Sliver. This is true for Viper. This is true for Metasploit, imp hash. Simple. It's dead simple. The list of DLLs and their names and the order they're loaded. Again, I could change that, but guess what? Plenty of people don't, because 46 sandboxes caught that. That means more than 46 pen testers didn't change the imp hash. Dead simple. Amazing, amazing stuff. Love the imp hash. And it even said it was Metasploit, right? Here's hybrid analysis. I just Googled the hash. It's Metasploit. Great. Imp hash, right? And by the way, when you change the template file to Metasploit, you change the imp hash too. Simple. Pro tip, right? Another thing is I called it hello.exe to make it innocuous. It's unsigned. 99 point something % of software is now, well, at least from Microsoft, is signed. Do low quality vendors make software that's not signed? Yeah. And the bigger question I have is, why are you buying that software? Because that's extremely immature. It's a sign of low code quality if they're not signing it. So if you're paying a vendor for a program and they're not signing it, take a step back and say why. Because a code signing says Microsoft signed it and it hasn't changed, or Adobe signed it and it hasn't changed, or Google signed it and it hasn't changed. When you run notepad.exe, the signature says Microsoft created it, it has not changed. Those are important things to consider. If you're buying software that's not signed, that's a sign of low quality. Call them out. I'm more blunt than most, right? So if you look for unsigned anything, you'll find stuff. You'll chase some gooses around. That's fine. But you catch stuff too, right? They dump the hashes. They raise their privileges to system using the handy get system. I did the same thing on Sliver, by the way. And they dumped the hashes and they ran off against the tokens and chased the tokens and all that, stole tokens, impersonated tokens, all that good stuff. And they migrate, process migration. So right now I'm attached to hello.exe. I have a very tenuous foothold, right? Very tenuous foothold. And then I want to get out of that because EDF could kill that. If hello.exe dies, I die, right? Shell will drop. So if I migrate, I'm a DLL attached to hello.exe. I unattach and then reattach to something else. Something like WinLogon or something. That's not going to go away, right? That's what I did. Now let's detect that. And both of these events, hash dump and the migrate to WinLogon, trigger create remote thread. Another Sysmon, a favorite of mine. Create remote thread, right? Here it is here. You see that hello.exe accessed LSASS, created a thread, right? So hello.exe uploaded to the root directory, pretty suspicious, right? And with the unknown SHA-1 hash, but a very well-known imp hash. Suddenly, I'm now no longer attached to that. You can delete hello.exe, that's fine. I'm now in WinLogon, right? That's where I want to be. LSASS is what manages the credentials on Windows. That's why LSASS is involved here. And here's the migrate. So that was the hash dump. Oh, no, sorry, I misspoke. Hash dump was me stealing the hashes. That's why LSASS is involved. Excuse me, I misspoke. Got one slide ahead. And here's me migrating to WinLogon. Sorry for misspeaking. So I go from hello. So hello.exe dumped the hashes. That's why LSASS was involved. Hello.exe migrated to WinLogon. Great. Now you can kill hello.exe all you want. WinLogon is going to be running. There you go. And now you see Sliver, same thing. So Sliver is the new hotness, one of the new hotnesses, open source framework. It randomly names EXEs with a fairly innocuous name, but joint ball was the one that random word_random_word.exe. Pretty innocuous, and a list of bad exe names won't work. It's going to be different every time. And I uploaded it, ran it, and guess what? Stop me if you've heard this one before. Here's the and joint ball is also polymorphically encoded, right? The SHA-1 hash, the SHA-256 hash will be unknown, but you probably know what's coming. 0 hits on SHA-256, 9 on the impasse. Yeah. There you go, right? That's Sliver. That's the new hotness. Same with process migration, by the way. Let's migrate processes using a completely different tool, but doing the same thing. You know, I want to migrate, I want to raise privileges, I want to steal tokens. All these frameworks do the same thing. And the Windows event logging is largely the same on all of them, if you have the visibility. And yeah, stop me if you've heard this one before, part 2. Thread 8, joint ball going to winlogon.exe, remote thread. Same exact event log, same. The only difference is the name of the exe. Different tool, different framework entirely. Same thing. And I could go on for hours on this too. I could give you 30 events just like this. There's a huge amount of overlap amongst these tools, right? If you have the visibility, it's all there. All right. That was fun. I know I pack a lot into a talk. I like to, I've had people say, hey, I couldn't write things down as fast as you said them. I said, yeah, well, that's, you know that, right? The talk's gonna be archived. My slides will be archived. The links are there. I hope you had fun. Hope to see you in 511. Hope to see you at my talk on Deep Blue CLI in a few weeks and after that. And John and everyone else, thanks for having me. I had a blast.